Welcome to Upthinking Finance, a podcast that offers a unique and discerning view of economics and financial planning. Here is your host, Emerson Fersch.
Welcome to another episode of Upthinking Finance. Musician Leonard Cohen once remarked, "The blizzard of the world has crossed the threshold, and it has overturned the order of the soul." Now, there was a time when I thought financial independence was simply having enough money to do whatever you want, whenever you want. But then 2011 rolled around, and for those of you who remember, Congress was in a huge disagreement and battle over raising the debt ceiling, which is something we've kind of become accustomed to now. You know, threats of the government shutting down, and politicians arguing over spending money that the country doesn't have. But the unique part about this event was that one of the major bond rating agencies, Standard & Poor's, actually downgraded the creditworthiness of United States debt. Bonds. And I remember thinking at the time, why should average people like me and the clients I work with be subject to the whims and really incompetence of people in Washington who are clearly disconnected from the needs of their constituents? Why should their inability to work together and do what's best for the country cause our wealth to decrease and put insecurity in our lives? And so my concept of financial independence broadened at that point to realize that it also was the ability to minimize the impact outside variables like this had on our lifestyle. And so for those of you who've been watching these podcasts, episode 2 talked about the greatest risk to retirement. There was a section about income segmenting, which is positioning money in retirement so that no matter what the markets are doing, for whatever reason they're doing what they're doing, people could still maintain their lifestyle and draw income without worrying about selling investments into a loss. I also learned the value of going into retirement without having any debt, paying off houses, getting rid of credit cards, car payments, planning so that your personal fixed costs are low so that when taxes go up or, $7 a gallon gas in some places arrives, it doesn't impact your lifestyle, or at least not to the extent it might. And this is even true for people who are still working. I shared in a previous episode, or I think that, my wife and I, when we were both working, we only lived off of one of our incomes just so that if something happened to one of our jobs for some reason, we'd be okay. So there's that. But I think it even goes beyond the direct financial decisions we make. And there's other considerations. I grew up in Southern California. I lived there almost most of my life. And when I was a kid, power outages were kind of like this fun anomaly. It's like, ooh, how long is the power going to be out? I mean, it just didn't happen. Today, people live with planned brownouts, with the threat of blackouts. And does anybody ever think what would happen if the power was out for 3 days? Or let's look at what COVID taught us. I mean, everything locked down and things that we take for granted like toilet paper and fresh eggs you couldn't get. So there's, I think, a broader view of financial independence that kind of maybe travels over that boundary into complete self-reliance. And that's what today's guest is here for, and why we're going to have a conversation with a man known as the Angery American, Chris Weatherman. Angry spelled with an E, by the way, Angery. He's the author of a series of books called The Survivalists. There's 11 in the series, 2 of which have actually appeared on the bestseller list of USA Today. He's also co-authored 5 other titles. And for those of you who watch the History Channel on the show Alone, he appeared in season 1. Chris has been involved in prepping since the 1990s, and his practice revolves around a couple of different things, teaching primitive skills as well as modern survival tactics that focus on being prepared, not only with the proper equipment, but really with the proper mental attitude. He speaks all over the country. He's very well known. He has a presence on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also has a website and a YouTube channel, all under the Angery American pseudonym. Chris currently lives with his family in Florida on the edge of the Ocala National Forest. So it's my pleasure to welcome the Angery American, Chris Weatherman, live from Florida. Chris, thanks for joining me today.
Glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
No, I appreciate it, brother. So I guess the first place to start, because a lot of things I want to talk about, is this, I guess it would be a stereotype as to what, when people hear prepping, I think the thought that comes to mind are kind of apocalyptic extremists who maybe grew up with parents who are building bunkers during the early '60s, and so what would be helpful is if you don't mind, if you don't mind, maybe kind of dispelling some of that and sort of explaining, from your perspective as one who's immersed in the lifestyle, who preppers are, and why people are drawn to this.
Preppers they're really everybody. The COVID episode has and what we're still living through now has clearly demonstrated to us that the just-in-time inventory systems and all the functions of this highly tuned society that we live in. It's highly tuned, but it's also fragile. And COVID's demonstrated that. So to preppers, they just want to take a little bit more responsibility. They don't want to trust the system and believe that they don't get stuck in what we call normalcy bias. So normalcy bias is nothing bad happened yesterday, so nothing bad's going to happen today. Well, we don't look at it like that. And you hear a lot of claims that the show on Nat Geo, what was that? Doomsday Preppers, really cast people in a bad light. But you'll hear a lot of talk about what people are prepping for. And I'm prepping to live. That's what I'm prepping to do. I prep food, medical, energy, security, communications. I mean, you name it, I prepare for it. But it's not for the end of the world per se. What I'm prepping for is what would be the end of my world, which could be a number of things. Medical illness, job loss, which I don't have a job no more, so I guess, that's kind of a good thing. Or a bad hurricane that comes through and the power's out for a month in Florida. That would be the end of the world if it's in the summertime. And that's what most people are doing. They aim high, so they're going to say, well, I'm going to kind of prepare, I'm going to look for this level. But in reality, they're all prepping for the end of their world. And I can't tell you what that is for each individual because it's always different. But just like we have life insurance, we have Aflac insurance, we have car insurance and homeowners insurance. We have all these insurance. We insure so many aspects of our life, but we don't actually insure the continuity of our lives. And that's all prepping is ensuring the continuity of our lives.
People generally, I think, your average person maybe doesn't even want to start thinking about this stuff because, and would you say that's because it just sort of opens doors that potentially lead you down a path of fears that most people don't want to think about or entertain? I mean, is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, there's a weight that comes with taking this responsibility, and if you're not careful, you can let it consume you and overtake your life. And there's a lot of aspects of it that when you start looking into them, they get scary, but you mitigate that by developing a plan, and then working your plan and try not to get off into the weeds. It's very easy to do. But putting back a little bit of food, having energy reserves, cash reserves. I'm a big fan of cash reserves, physical on-hand cash reserves. Diversifying into PMs and things like that, not for bartering and all that kind of craziness that you hear a lot of people talking about. To me, I look at PMs as a storage of wealth, because if we wake up one day and we hear the dollar is dead, all hail the new dollar, I'll get a hell of a lot more new dollars with PMs than I will with old dollars. So to me, I look at it as a storage of wealth, not for trading and stuff. And I don't get overboard in it either. I don't have tons of it, just a little bit, but it's just when you wake up to this reality that one of the terms I like to tell everybody is you are your own first responder, and I don't care if that's a car accident, a fire at your house, a crime being committed against you, or a natural disaster. No one's immediately coming to help you individually. You got to be able to take care of yourself. And a lot of preppers out there, myself included, the biggest reason I got into prepping in the beginning was I didn't want to be that guy standing in line waiting for help. Because if I can take care of myself, those are resources that I don't need from the state, capital S state, that could go to somebody who does need them. So just a little extra effort on my part makes me no longer, reliant upon that. I can take care of myself and my family, and that takes the burden off of them of trying to take care of me. And that help can go to somebody who's not ready. And I live in Florida, and hurricanes are common. And life in Florida after a hurricane is rough, Fuel is in short supply. The power can be out for weeks at a time, and everything gets hard to find. So I plan ahead. I've got fuel storage on my property. I keep diesel fuel and gasoline stored here in the hundreds of gallons of quantities. Food, generators. I'm right now in the process of engineering a rather substantial solar power plant from my home that will run everything on my property and be 100% off grid. I have no reliance on the grid whatsoever, because I have a feeling that we're going to be coming into a time where blackouts, brownouts of the rolling variety are going to become common, and I don't want to deal with them. So I'm going to go ahead and step up, pull the trigger, and get this big solar plant built now.
That's interesting you brought that up, because that was one of the things in my intro for you. I kind of mentioned, I think there's always this, it's always preparing. I grew up in Southern California all my life, and earthquakes, that's kind of always the threat. But it's like you mentioned, the COVID, it's a disruption to just maybe some day-to-day things that, you can't even foresee. So I've got, most of, the people I work with in my firm and people I know, live in cities and urban areas. And I guess maybe the thing that'd be helpful is a couple thoughts. One is, once you open your mind to this, it seems like there's just always so much to do. There's so many things, and it never ends, right? And so, what would you say to somebody who's living, in your typical, neighborhood in Orange County or Southern California, as an example? Where's a good place to start if you've never really even thought about food storage beyond having a few cans of Campbell's in the pantry? What would be some, what I mean? What would be a good place to start where people can feel like they're doing something that makes sense, but at the same time is really helpful to them, rather than just thinking that it's, why bother?
Let's take California as the example. That's what you use. So if I lived in Southern California right now, my biggest concern would be water. Southern California doesn't have a water supply. So, and you guys know the rationing that's happening there, and all the stuff. They're going around and putting reducers in people's water lines who they say are using too much water. So I would be looking at starting to store water to start with. And this stuff doesn't have to be expensive. So if you drink sodas and you buy 2-liter bottles, don't throw those things away. Rinse them out, clean them, fill them with water, stick them in a closet someplace. That water will be perfectly safe to drink a year from now. You won't have to do nothing to it. Then you can move on to food. And food is easy to do. A lot of people get carried away with it. They get down in the weeds when they think preppers. They think all this bulk storage and this big stuff they're doing. But the easiest way to start is what we call copy canning. So when you go to the grocery store and you're getting your groceries for the week, you just buy a few extra cans of the things you're already buying. Stuff your family already eats. That way, if you come into a time of crisis, you're not trying to introduce exotic menu items to your family that they've never eaten before. That just adds stress to the situation. So you buy the stuff you already eat, stuff you know your family likes. You pick a spot in your pantry and you put those cans on the shelf there. This is where I'm going to start my food storage. And you just keep doing that. And every time you go to the store, you buy a little extra, and you just keep piling it there. And once you have, let's say a 30-day supply for your family of this, I know this food could get my family by for 30 days. Now, yeah, we may not be eating like we're accustomed to, but we're going to be eating foods that we are comfortable with, Once you're at that 30-day point, continue doing it, but then start rotating those out. So when you buy new cans, instead of, going to the store and buying the cans for this week and my extra ones for my storage, buy your ones for your storage and pull some of those older ones out and stick them in the rotation. So you buy this week's food, my storage food, stick it in rotation, pull some of that stuff out and move it in to this week's use. That way you're naturally rotating this stuff too. And you'll find the benefits from this is that you're preparing dinner and, I need a can of kidney beans for the chili, Oh, well, we have some on the shelf, in the storage. I'll pull that out, but make a note and replace it, So it's easy to do, and it doesn't have to get extravagant or crazy or anything. Just you're looking for long-term, shelf-stable foods. That's what you want. So pastas, rices, anything canned or jarred is fine. But I would avoid any of the stuff like the meals in a box, for lack of a better term. You maybe like hamburger helper is an example. I would avoid stuff like that. They don't have a long shelf life because they have fats and oils in them that'll go rancid. So, just like I said, pastas, sauces, rice, beans, in the dry form are all great. They last forever. And then anything canned will last well beyond any expiration date printed on it. So.
You've emphasized, I listened to an interview you did with Monkey Works. I think maybe that was a year ago, maybe not quite that long. And you talked about water. And I know one of the things I think you mentioned was about the Berkey, which we actually have got. And that thing's amazing. And in fact, I've advised a few clients who've asked about, water purifier systems because it's just, that thing's easy and it's great. I just, to me, something like that makes sense. Water's a big deal. And so again, for people who live in these cities, what do you do? Because it seems to me that's the one resource that you need the most. That's also not going to last as long as you probably, you could probably starve yourself before you could allow yourself to get dehydrated. Does that make sense? Am I right on that?
Oh, absolutely. People say that you can go 3 days without water. Well, that's in a perfect scenario. You can go 3 days without water. You can die without water in a day. Depending on your level of exertion, the temperature, your sun exposure, and a bunch of other factors, you can die in a day of dehydration.
Particularly if your power grid goes out, you don't have any more air conditioning.
Exactly. And you still have to maintain hygiene, because disease is the biggest vector for problems post disaster. So you got to maintain hygiene. You got to have enough to drink, enough to cook. If you don't have water, you don't eat food. You don't, because your body needs water to digest food with. So by eating, you'll actually increase your rate of dehydration. So if you don't have water, you just kind of got to go hungry until you can find water. And the thing about water is this: if you don't have water where you are, you're going to have to leave where you are and go to the water. It's that simple, or you're going to die. I recommend people get what's called a Silcox key. They're a 4-point little tool that's used to open hose bibs on the outside of commercial buildings. A lot of times they don't have the handle; they just have this little thing. You stick this key in there to turn it on. Because when water stops flowing, there's still water in a lot of these pipes in these buildings, and you can get it out. And having something like that will let you maybe go around and fill up a jug, and get water from businesses in the area. Another thing people need to remember is the hot water heater in your house can be drained, and that water can be used and drank and used for bathing and whatever else. It's city water, so you can use that. So you've got 30 gallons, 35 gallons worth of water in your house just sitting there. That if the power goes out and everything, that you could tap into to use in an emergency. You might want to filter it. It might have some rust or scale or stuff in there, but it's nothing that's going to hurt you. You brush your teeth with that same water every day anyway, and you shower in it, so it's perfectly safe. But water's the big one for us. When we do evaluations for people or consulting, like for homesteads and things like that, the first question we ask is, where's the water? Because if there's no water on the property, we're like, this isn't viable long term, because it's just that critical.
Now, you've also mentioned too, this just makes logical sense, because there's people who get this idea, and I don't know, maybe this borders on, extremes, but this bugging out, leaving your house. And, I know you've been pretty adamant about, why would you leave the area that where your base is, where your supplies are. But what point is that ever really an option, other than, I guess, as you mentioned, if you start running out of stuff? Is it smart to have like a backup? We have property out of state. We're down here in Utah. We have property up in Montana, and but that's a 9-hour drive. And, to me, it just seems like that could be a problem. But I'm just wondering, for people that have cabins, again, in Southern California, a lot of people have vacation properties up in Big Bear and places like this. Do you rely on those, or is that just adding a variable that you just want to kind of avoid?
Well, no, you always need to have a plan. I have a plan here. I live in a very rural area of Florida on 10 acres, but I have a plan for leaving here if it comes to it, because while I don't want to, and it's not my first plan, I could be forced to do it through any number of means. And for the folks that live in densely populated urban areas, population density is not your friend, okay? First, it defies the laws of nature, which will naturally correct themselves in time. The land has what we call a carrying capacity. And by that we mean that however much land you want to say, be it an acre or be it the entire state of California, has a carrying capacity of how many organisms of each variety it can support. Now, we've artificially manipulated that to make land carry far more humans than it's capable of carrying. So in a crisis situation, especially if it's something that happens and it gets to become long term, having a plan to get out of that crowd would be highly advisable. We joke with folks when they contact us and like, well, I live in LA and I need to, what I need to do to start prepping. And I laugh and say, hire a realtor, sell it and move. But I know that's not viable for people, but
Get out.
yeah, get the hell out. I've spent a lot of time in LA and I hate it over there, but having a plan to move is important. The biggest thing though is you have to decide what is your trigger to move, because you don't want to be late, but you also don't want to do this and then find out you didn't need to do it. But being late, if you're late on a bug out, trigger, then you're probably not going to make it to where you're trying to go.
When you say that, I have visions of the first season of Walking Dead where all the cars are jammed up on the freeway getting out of Atlanta.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what will happen.
Well, actually, you know what? I have my sister and brother-in-law, they used to live in Miami, and I remember them telling me these stories of, trying to get out with these hurricane warnings and, trying to find a hotel, and they've got cats and sitting in traffic and, the whole thing. I mean, you're probably familiar with that. At least have seen it.
I've seen it. I've never had to participate in it because I've always planned accordingly. I've never had to run away.
So here's one too. And again, I'm sorry if I'm all over the place, but because this is like a broad topic. And I think that's probably part of the help of what you've shared to this point is just, it kind of narrows it down to at least some essentials. But I mean, people, again, keep going back to people I know in Southern California have swimming pools. I mean, how beneficial is a swimming pool? I mean, I don't think you can drink that water, or can you? Or is it mainly just something you'd use to use for more like hygiene and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, you could use it for hygiene and flushing toilets and things like that. The problem with pools is the algicides that are added to it. So chlorine's fine. You can deal with chlorine. That'll off-gas naturally on its own, and the water will become inert as far as chlorine goes in short order without treatment. But the problem is the other chemicals, the algicides and the fungicides and things like that are in the water. Those can be really bad for you. Now, in the worst case, if that was all I had, I'd drink it. I'd filter it best I could. If you got a Berkey filter like we mentioned earlier, those are great. There's also another one on the market called a Grail, which is a small hand unit, but it has various filters that'll remove chemicals, heavy metals, and some other stuff. So having something like that on hand would be a good idea too. And I recommend everybody have a portable water filter. Everybody needs to have one, because you might find yourself, like you're saying, you're trying to get out of town and you're stuck in traffic, and everybody in the car is dying of thirst, but there is a pond over there. And if you just had a filter, you could go over there and filter water and drink it. And most people would be like, oh my God, I'd never do that. Well, it's just water, folks. Surface water is fine as long as it's properly filtered and treated. You can drink it.
Okay, so I'm trying to think of a tactful way to ask this, because I know you probably have, some pretty strong opinions maybe on this, but I mean, how long? You joked about. I think it was again with Monkey. You guys were talking about the 72-hour kit and what happens at hour 73. But I mean, is it 30? I mean, if you're saying okay, this would be at some point, unless everything completely collapses, and I think that's probably a scenario no one wants to think about. But I mean, how long should people target if again you're this beginning person and you want to have food and stuff? I mean, is a month? I mean, is that kind of what you're saying, or is it just as much as you can do? I mean, is there like a milestone, you like little goals you want to set? What's useful?
We tell people to start with a month. All right, try to get a month's worth of stuff put away: food, water, medicine. Like I said, hygiene stuff, everything, so that if something would happen. So think COVID lockdown. All right, if you were locked in your house and you had to stay at home for a month, you want to have the food and the things necessary to be able to do that. Once you've achieved a month, if you're comfortable and you think, I'm good, this is all I need to do, great. If you're not, all right, aim for 90 days. So now you're just going to triple what you've already done.
What about, okay, remember that episode, you may have seen that episode of The Twilight Zone where I think the one family's got like, there's a nuclear threat, and the one family has a bomb shelter, and then, and everybody else, no one else did anything. And then there's this threat and everybody's, beating each other. I mean, it's like the worst of humanity, comes out. Right. And, what's the role of your neighbors in all this? I mean, I guess it would be relative to your community, certainly, but I mean, you know what I mean? Because I'm a member of a church that's used to talk a lot about emergency preparedness, from the pulpit actively, and I haven't really heard messages like that in a while, kind of oddly enough. But where does cooperation with I mean, obviously there's you want to help people. But then again, I guess when you drill it down, ultimately your family's your priority, I would think. I mean, I don't know, maybe I've completely misguided on this, but you know what I'm getting at? I mean, how does the community, where does that all fit?
Most Americans don't know their neighbors. We just don't talk to the people we live around no more. And you really should get to know your neighbors for several reasons. One, you might find that they're assets to you. They have skills or knowledge that you don't possess. That they may be thinking the same way you are too, that, hey, we should do a few things and get ready. But just as important is you will learn who is a liability, who the guy that says, oh, I'd never do something like that. I'll just take it from other people when I need it. Well, that's a guy you want to mark down on your list of, I got to keep an eye on him. Because no man, woman, or family can be an island. You will need people, because at some point you have to go to sleep. And in a world where we're talking about where people are living off of preps and things like that, security is a big issue. Hungry people are desperate, and it's like trying to save a drowning man. If someone is drowning and you jump into water to try to help them, more often than not, they actually drown the rescuer because they're desperate to survive. It's not through maliciousness; it's just desperation to live, and people will do the same thing when it comes to food and water and stuff like that, especially if they have a family, they got children and stuff like that, they're at home crying that they're hungry and you have nothing to give them. You're going to go out and do whatever it takes to feed your family. And people say, I would never steal, or I would never do this. Never say never. Never say never. Because you'll do whatever it takes to feed your family.
And I appreciate the candor on that. I mean, it's kind of an awkward, topic, but I mean, I kind of like asking questions that I think people are thinking about. So let me ask you this. What was the inspiration behind your survivalist books? I honestly didn't know about them until I started doing a little digging, but it sounds like I'm kind of curious because it sounds like sort of a interesting way to present a lot of the ideas and things to people, and rather than like do this, do that, more of like a kind of a fictional story approach. So do you mind talking about your books?
Yeah. So, I've been in the survival, and I'm going to use the term survival field for over 30 years. I started out learning primitive skills, Stone Age skills. And then I have worked my way through all that stuff up to where I'm at now in what we call modern prepping. But I wrote Going Home on a forum on the internet as entertainment for myself. At the time, I was working doing the security systems in jails and prisons all around the country. I traveled often. I spent a lot of time in hotels, and I'm not one to hang out in bars and that sort of thing. So I'd sit in a hotel room at night and mess around on the internet, forums, learn stuff, do things. And this one forum I was on had a fiction section, and I was reading their stories one night, and I was like, these are all kind of cool, but there's kind of missing something for me. And I said, what the hell? I'm going to write a story. And that was literally as much thought as went into it. And I just picked EMP to make it as bad as it could be. I picked the route. So Morgan, this character, Morgan Carter, he's 250 miles from home when an EMP occurs in the U.S. And he's just trying to get home. And I picked that very scenario because the day I started writing it, I had done the exact trip that the character does from Thomasville, Georgia, back to Central Florida. But I'd done it in my company vehicle, I didn't have to walk it like he did. So I started writing the story online. It immediately took off. It took on a life of its own. It had over 2 million views online before I finished writing it. People were telling me to publish it, and I was like, I'm no writer. Nobody's going to pay money for this garbage. I said, here, I'll write you guys another one. And I wrote the second book on the same forum. But as I was writing the second book, one of my friends posted my PayPal account, and he's like, hey everybody, let's send him money. We'll make him do it. And people did. A lot of people sent money. And then I was like, okay, all right, I'm obligated. I'm like, look, I'll get this made into a book so you guys can get your copies if you'll just shut up and leave me alone. Was not taking it serious, never envisioned this being what it is. Um, but I got it made into a book. I spent a lot of money to do it. I got ripped off. And but it went on Amazon, and the first month it was on Amazon, it made a quarter of my annual salary. And I went, huh, maybe there is something to this. So I started to take it serious. And then a couple weeks later, Penguin Books calls and makes me an offer on the book. And I turned it down.
You rejected them to keep control of your content? Is that right?
I rejected them because I was making more money on Amazon than what they were offering me.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they offered me one thing, and I was like, dude, I'm like, I make more than that now on Amazon. And so, but they called me 2 weeks later with an offer that I couldn't turn down. They had either found religion or something. I don't know what happened to them, but they made an offer that I couldn't say no to, and I took that one. So, and then that was it. Now we were off to the races now, and so now the series has 11 books in it. I'm working on number 12. It's on that screen right there, right now, and we're developing it for a streaming platform like Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, something to that affair, as well. So we're hoping to get it into film production. And I have other series that I write too, and I've also done nonfiction in this space as well. So it's now this is my job. This is what I do. So,
well, it's cool. I mean, obviously, you love what you do. You're exceptional at it, and to be able to help people and make a living. I mean, that's really kind of the perfect scenario.
It is. Hearing people say that they read these books and that it made them change aspects of their life to be more secure. I mean, I've had people that sold their house, quit their jobs, moved into the country, bought a homestead, and they're going hardcore. And they're like, man, we would have never done this if it wasn't for your books. And they're like, and our quality of life is so much better. Because you're in financial management. So I like to tell people that true wealth is the ability to spend your time the way you want to, because that is the ultimate resource. Because, the day we're born, we have a finite amount of time, and we don't know how much that is. We have no idea. But you have a finite amount of it. You can't earn no more. You can't buy no more. So the ability to spend your time as you choose, to me, is true wealth. So I consider myself very wealthy. If I wake up in the morning and want to go fishing, I'm going fishing. If this afternoon, I have a gun range on my property. Me and my wife will be training on the range this afternoon. Just because we can do she's out in her garden right now. I think she's laying in the sun, but she's out in the garden right now. So, I get to work from home. I get to be with my wife all day, and we do a lot of stuff together, and it's been amazing. It's changed my life, and the fact that I can help folks and answer questions. I'm an instructor, a consultant. I do a whole bunch of stuff. So that's awesome. It really is profound, the impact that the books have had on a lot of people. Never would have imagined that at all.
No, that's great. I actually started the intro talking about just effectively what you just said. I used to think that, managing money and, financial independence was just simply, having enough money to do what you want when you want. But really, it's what you said. And I think a component of it, which is to me why I think this preparedness is really all part of that financial independence of self-reliance thing, because what you're doing at the end of the day is eliminating, to the extent you can, the influence of all these outside forces we have no control over. Government decisions, taxes, just you could go on and on with all this stuff that's, from my opinion, I'm a long-term optimistic guy, but short-term, it just is not a lot to really be too positive about.
No, it's not.
But what's interesting is the people I've been interviewing in this podcast, it's been kind of fun because your story is sort of similar, is that people are getting to a place where they're living the life they want rather than allowing sort of these outside pressures to kind of dictate where they go. And it's good to hear, you do something you love and you get blessed with this revenue stream and spending time with family. I mean, I don't know what else really there is that's that, it's to strive for. I mean, that seems to be the ultimate for most people. So thank you for that. I guess, my last thought would be, and maybe you've already answered, is just kind of, okay, because I know you shared an interview that there was a movie, I think The Road was one that best reflected sort of where you could see the extremes going. But I mean, what's your outlook, without putting you on the spot, but I mean, we all have thoughts and views. I mean, big picture, longer term, do you think that we come out of, the darkness into the light, so to speak? I mean,
I think, yes, we will. But presently, I see about a decade of very, very hard time ahead of us. But there's a lot of things there's a lot of factors that play into that any one of them could change, and it would change the entire outcome. So our economic outlook right now is bleak at best. We've got a food crisis going on globally. That's only that really hasn't even started yet. We're in the beginning of that, and so we haven't even seen it yet. There's been 95 food processing plants taken out through various fires and other weird circumstances in the last, this year alone, I think it is 95 of them. We have the political turmoil in the country, so we're looking at mass civil unrest probably. We have one political party in the street screaming to tear down the Supreme Court because they can't get their way under the foundations of this country and how it works. So they're like that kid that used to play a game with that in the middle of it, when he was losing, he'd want to change the rules all the time. We have a militant segment of society too, who's already taken to the streets and committing acts of violence. And these people aren't even hungry yet. They're well fed, they've got clothing, they've got everything they need. They're warm and dry place to sleep at night. When people start having to choose between buying gas to drive to work and feeding their children, hungry people start revolutions. Okay. That's what starts revolutions. And what you're not seeing is all of the mass civil unrest that's taking place around globally at the moment that the mainstream media just won't report. Honduras is like, I think they're almost 2 weeks into mass protests every day over fuel prices. Holland just shut down something like hundreds of farms because they want to reduce their nitrogen footprint by like 30%. So now these are Dutch people who are always pretty quiet and mild-mannered, and but they're now taking to the streets. They're shutting down the interstates and stuff, pulling their tractors out there and closing them down. Hungry people are dangerous people because you've got to feed yourself, you've got to feed your family. And I think as we get farther and farther into this food crisis thing, along with rising prices, it's really the perfect terrible storm. Especially when you add on top of that the already fomenting civil unrest, it can be explosive at that point. So I don't look at, my outlook on people is a lot different than most folks. You'll hear everybody say, well, I believe people are inherently good. My belief is this: people are inherently base animals, and their reactions are predicated on the stimulus that they're put under. So the more stress that they're put under, the more base animal level they become. And it's a mechanism of survival, and I think it's going to get much worse before it gets better. I figure by this fall, no one's going to be able to look around and say that we're not in a recession or worse. I think we're already in one, obviously, if you go by metrics alone, but by the fall, I don't think anybody's going to be able to argue the point that we're not. It'll be obvious to everybody. So, if one hurricane hits, we already have enough problems with fuel, but a hurricane hits, gas prices in this country are going to be astronomical.
Yeah. So let's end on a rising note of hope. All right. And maybe it's simply this, because, obviously you have skills that are pretty unique and extensive, I would say. I know in our household, we've done some things to just, cut out debt, cut out a lot of those financial things that could be a hamper. But we've built up food storage. In fact, one of my guests, who's a financial guy in Europe, talked about buying farmland and, or putting up a greenhouse, which we did, and those are things, I mean, it's one thing to sit and either, pretend like you're never going to need to be concerned with this stuff. stay in a complete state of denial or to just panic about all the things that seem overwhelming. But I think there's a level of peace that does come from at least feeling like you've taken some action. You've done some things to try to protect your family and potentially, as we were talking before, help people around you. And I think, there is something to be said for that. So I don't know, just any final thoughts, Chris? And again, I just really appreciate you being on. You've got so much to offer.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for at least being aware. I think a lot of people walk around ignoring so much of what's happening because they just don't want to think about it and deal with it. And yeah, it can become oppressive at times. Like, I track stuff constantly. That's what I do all over the globe. I'm following what's happening. And for me at times it can become oppressive, and I'll be like, got to step back and take a break for it. But it doesn't affect my life. I'm just aware. I think being aware, I'd rather know that there's a car coming and have the opportunity to jump out of the way as opposed to just walking down the street with my back to it, wait for it to hit me. That gives you some comfort, and knowing that if you're taking some steps to mitigate things for your family, to make any impact softer for you, that's a good thing, and this doesn't have to be an all-consuming deal. There's balance in everything, right? You have to still live life, all right? That has to happen. But we want to also try to prepare the path forward to make it as easy to live as we can, no matter the situation we find ourselves in. Now, nobody wants to live through a collapse of anything, but it happens. It happens all the time. The folks in Ukraine in February didn't think Russia was going to invade. At least that's what they're saying publicly. Privately, I'm sure they knew it. But in Venezuela, they didn't expect their economy to fall apart like it did. No one expects it. So just being prepared for the unexpected will give you a level of comfort, knowing that, well, if that did happen, we're not going to be as bad off because we did this and this and this, So we're going to be, yeah, it's going to be horrible, but we're going to be okay, So that adds comfort to me, which is why I do what I do. Everything I do is predicated on to soften our impact, Yeah, we're going to hit with everybody else, but we're not going to just lawn dart into this thing. We're going to kind of slide in. That's my hope. So.
Well, I appreciate your time, man. It was nice of you to respond so quickly when I reached out to you. So if people are looking to get more information about the Angery American, what's the best place to go?
You can hit me up into the social media. I've got all of them: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those. The books, the best way to find those if you're looking for them is you can find them on Amazon. Just look up Going Home by A. American, and you'll find it right there. They're on audiobook, they're on Kindle, they're print, so they're all over the place. But social media is a good way to follow what I'm doing. We have several Facebook pages for different things because we try to control what's happening in the pages so the pages don't get off the rails. So we keep them kind of topic specific. So if you want knowledge, there's a survival and prepping page, Angery American Survival and Preparedness. Then we have one we call Around the Campfire. If you want to just go in and talk stuff, that's where you can do that there. We have another one we call the Poacher Shack, taken from the books, which is where you can talk about the books. We don't allow talk about the books on the other pages because people are different stages of reading them and we don't want spoilers. Well, this is where the spoilers can happen. If you go in there, you're walking in, you're taking your own risk because that's where they're allowed to talk about it. So, but yeah, social media is, I try to maintain it and keep it moving. So
God bless you, brother. I appreciate you being on with me, and just thanks for joining me on Upthinking Finance today.
Thanks for having me, man. And if anybody has questions, if your folks have questions and you guys want to put together a list and we do this again and we sit and answer them, I'd be more than happy to.
Emerson Fersch is a registered representative with and securities offered through LPL Financial, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisor services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor and separate entity from Capital Investment Advisors. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and the companies they represent are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capital Investment Advisors. Individual tax and legal matters should be discussed with your tax or legal expert. Economic forecasts set forth may not develop as predicted, and there can be no guarantee that strategies promoted will be successful. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. There is no assurance that the techniques and strategies discussed are suitable for all investors or will yield positive outcomes. The purchase of certain securities may be required to affect some of the strategies. Investing involves risks, including possible loss of principal.